Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin. In today's video, I want to talk about how I built my fabric stash from the thrift store and have a lot to say about it. Recently, someone asked me how I grew my fabric stash, and I had to think about it because I now have a fabric stash, and it seems like it just kind of happened, which of course it didn't just happen. When I started, I only had white and blue shirts. When I started quilting, the only fabric that I had was shirts from the thrift store and remnant fabric from nursery bedding and clothespin. Well, really, the life of my marriage. So 28 going on 29 years worth of collected fabric. And that's what I had. And so that's the first quilt that I made, which I have right here off camera. I'm going to reach and get it. It's blue and white. That's what it is. It's blue and white and a little bit of yellow down here at the bottom. And honestly, half of these yellows were fabrics that I called my sister up and said, "Do you have any yellow fabric?" And so, I really did just have mostly blue and gray and white shirts. Now, the upside to that is it's a really pretty, soft, very smooth quilt that feels like the other side of the pillow. And it was fun to make, and it was a really great learning process. Man, I learned so much and loved it instantly. It was like I had found my thing, just like a duck in water. So, of course, as I was finishing this quilt, like before I ever even finished it, I had already started thinking of what's the next quilt that I want to make. And I think that that's the first answer to the question, how do you build your fabric stash? If you get into quilting, unless you're just extraordinary, you're going to be thinking about future quilts that you want to make. I have not met a quilter yet. And if you read the comments on almost every video that I've ever made, you will see, well, the next quilt I'm making, or when I get done with these 3 or these 13. And so it sparks your creativity while you're working on the one that you're on. And sometimes that creative energy helps carry you through the end of this process and gives you, inspiration for the next one. Let me put it this way. So for me, as I was working on that blue and white and yellow quilt, I decided that I wanted to make this very big, very colorful checkerboard quilt that was alternating a colored block and a white block. And I have a video about that if you want to see it. It's called Quilt Stories Checkerboard Quilt. And so if you want to see what I'm referencing. But my idea for that quilt was I wanted all prints, so plaids, stripes, polka dots, and anything else, and white shirt fabric as the alternating block. And you may now be thinking, but you just said you didn't have a fabric stash. That is correct. You are correct, sir. I did not have a fabric stash. So I started shopping at the thrift store with an eye on what sort of colors and prints and fabrics I would want in that checkerboard quilt. And so I found some really fun, very bright plaids. There's one right in front of me. Paul says it looks like, I've referenced this so many times. He says it looks like an ugly 70s Christmas wrapping, and he's probably right. But found this one, found an orange plaid that I've used multiple times in different ways on this channel. And so I just started I just started keeping my eyes open, honestly, when I was at the thrift store. And that's when I started noticing for real how many variations in prints there are and how many colors there are. It's surprising. I was not expecting to find pink gingham or purple plaid or yellow stripe. I have a fabric in my stash that is like a clown stripe. No kidding. Totally looks like a clown stripe, which I used in a quilt, by the way. But I just started kind of gathering. It's a gathering. And it felt like when I went to the thrift store, like it was a treasure hunt. And I just kind of kept an open mind. And so, sure enough, I kind of pieced together, pardon the pun, a whole array of prints and bright colors and some muted colors and all kinds, and made this quilt out of it and loved it. Loved handling those fabrics, loved considering them. And like I said, I had used fabrics from leftovers. My sister contributed some when I would get to a place where I'd need more yellow and I didn't want to go shopping, which I did go shopping. And that's kind of how that was the first wave of building my stash. And because shirts have so much fabric in them, and it's so surprising. And of course, I was using 2.5-inch squares. So I might use a whole strip and have a whole shirt left. And the next thing I knew, I had a fair amount of fabric, and which is how I kind of had this tote scenario started happening, because I was breaking down shirts all the time and I was collecting. And you may notice, if you've seen how I store my fabric, I've now added a tote. I did have warm colors, which was orange and red and yellow and pink, which sometimes can go cool. And then I had the cool color tote, which was greens and blues and purples. And then I had the neutral tote. Well, recently I have realized that my totes were busting at the seams. Busting, not bursting, busting at the seams. And I needed more space. So I confiscated a tote back from one of my daughters. And now I have red and orange and pink, yellow and green, purple and blue, and my neutrals. And I have to say, this is, it's like happiness in a tote. Just the color arrangement, it just, I don't know, love everything about it. But that's not what we're here to talk about. But I started noticing then, because I had pulled together all these prints from various places, that I had almost exclusively prints in my stash. And I was starting to have a stash, which was kind of exciting. And I've said this before, and I will repeat it again. I don't exclusively quilt with thrifted fabric. I do go to my local quilt store, and they've done long arming for me. I've bought rulers and thread and batting and all backing fabric. I've done whole quilts with backing fabric that I bought. And I think that's great too. So if you are a person who you haven't kind of fully bought into the thrifted shirts, that's great. You can add to your stash in a variety of ways. It doesn't detract from the sustainability of your thrifted fabrics. So you can start with fabrics that you've bought from the store and add your thrifted shirts or linens or sheets or wherever thrifted items you get. Or you can do it the other way around, or both, both, one or the other. It really doesn't matter. A fabric stash is built in a variety of ways, and however it comes to you, it's your quilting journey, and that's great. But for me, after that first round of buying plaids and stripes and polka dots, I realized I don't have any solids. And so I went to the quilt store, the quilt fabric store, and was looking and did pick up some things. And then I thought, I've never really noticed if there are solid shirts at the thrift store. And it turns out that there are, and there are a lot of them. And I had just not noticed them because my eyes were on buying printed shirts. And so I just, navy, plum, forest green, it never even really registered. And then I started realizing, oh my gosh, there's some gorgeous shirts out here. So like this one that I have referenced also so many times, it's like the perfect color lipstick. That was a man's shirt. And this green, that is the most interesting combination. It has some blue in it. It's also very muted versus this green, which is actually not muted at all, and is almost teal. These were shirts that I found once I started having an eye on solids. So for me, as I went from project to project, so from quilt plan to quilt making, every time it added new fabrics. So I did an Irish chain quilt that is all gingham. And you can imagine how much gingham I have in my stash now. And then in my case, of course, I'm doing YouTube videos. And so sometimes I buy shirts for the sake of the YouTube video. And maybe you don't have a YouTube channel. Maybe you're going to, though. And maybe you will have something like that it builds up your stash. So like the purple shirt that I have referenced so many times, it's a laugh. It was a 99-cent cotton poly shirt that I bought small, that I bought to show how much fabric is in a small shirt. And I thought 99 cents. And it was that bright royal purple. And it just tickled me to no end. And then I decided that, well, I want to use that in a quilt. Let's see if I can do it. And I decided to use a pattern that had solids on one half, and that was the Elena quilt. So solids on one half, and then a printed men's shirt or printed thrifted fabric on the other. And I realized, I have this pink gingham. I need a solid pink. Or I have this lipstick pink shirt. I need a print to go with it. And so that is really how it happened. It happened very organically, very much an outworking of whatever project I was working on. I have the baby quilt that I made for my friend, and I laugh and say it was the millennial color palette. I did not have peaches and blush and beiges. I didn't have that in my stash. And so I went to the thrift store. I always start at the thrift store. It's kind of like, that's home base. Let's start at the thrift store. And what I can't find at the thrift store, I'll pick up at the fabric store. And so now I have this stash. And if you just glance, you'll see there's a pretty good mix of colors out here, because as I've done new projects, as I've been working with thrifted fabrics, I have to fill in the gaps. Now, sometimes I fill in those with fat quarters. Sometimes I will, like for my birthday last year, Paul got me a beautiful stack of art gallery fabrics in solids, and those have been used hopefully cleverly in various projects, and it have been great to fill in those gaps where I couldn't find a shirt in this color palette or in this exact color. And so it hasn't, well, now I can't remember how long I've been quilting, a couple of years. I now have this fabric stash, and I love that it's made up of just a whole variety of fabrics, a whole variety of sources that it came from. One of my sister's coworkers, who I would call a friend, turns out she watches my YouTube channel, and she was cleaning out her attic and found all this remnant fabric and gave it to me. And some of you have a huge fabric stash that you have inherited from family members who quilted. Lucky ducks that you are. So my pharmacist friend, who's also a quilter, she has a lot of fabrics that she got from her granny. There's another YouTube viewer who is local to me, who's also a pharmacist. Did not know that recently discovered that. She has a ton of fabric from, that she inherited from her, I think, great grandmother, grandmother, and then mother. And so some of you have a substantial fabric stash to start with. But if you are like me and you just got started and you love it, this is the way it goes. And so when you go to the thrift store, keep your eyes open. And it never hurts to just get out your fabric periodically and kind of look like, oh, I don't really have a lot of yellow. Or my green is kind of limited. And then if you just happen to see a green shirt, even if you don't have a plan for it, sometimes that's a great time to just pick up, especially if they're on sale. And especially if it's like colored tag day or it's half off day at your Salvation Army, or they have the however many shirts you can stuff in a bag. Think through, oh, I could really stand some more purple. Or I don't have enough gray. And the next thing you know, you will have built a fabric stash out of your thrift store. Or at least that's how it happened for me. I hope this has been encouraging and helpful for you. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Kathy Martin, and this is the Catbird Quilts.